Hi, folks. Hi, I'm Eric Brynjolfsson, director of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab. Pardon us for a few technical glitches here, but we're just getting underway. This is the Stanford Digital Economy Lab lunch seminar. And today we're very happy to have Huiyu Li here. She's a research advisor at the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank. She joined back in 2015, got her PhD here at Stanford University. Before that, she grew up in Australia and did her undergraduate and master's degrees in Japan. Huiyu researches long-run growth, inflation measurement, and firm dynamics. She's published in a lot of top academic journals like the American Economic Review. I won't list all the others. She's presented at conferences like the NBR Summer Institute, the Jackson Hole Symposium, and now the Stanford Digital Economy Lab Lunch Seminar. Please join me in welcoming Huiyu Li. And thank you for telling us about good rents and bad rents.
All right. Hi, everyone, both online and in person. Thank you very much for coming to this seminar. I look forward to getting your feedback. So this is joint work with Philippe Agnon and Simon Virgil, Timo Bopart, and Pete. He is in person here. Because I work for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, the usual disclaimers apply. What I present here today is not the view of the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay. It doesn't change on here. Okay. All right. So in the literature on growth, endogenous growth, much studied topic is whether we devote enough R&D to innovation. And usually we think that maybe there's too little R&D input overall because of externalities. So in this paper, we're looking at a slightly different question. Rather than thinking about whether the total amount of R&D is allocated efficiently, we're thinking about, given a fixed amount of R&D, how well is it allocated across firms? And the reason we're studying this is because we think potentially there is a source of R&D misallocation across firms, because firms could potentially have different amounts of spillovers in terms of knowledge to other firms. So more precisely what we do is we develop a model for endogenous growth where firms could differ on two dimensions. One is they could differ in their process efficiency. And another thing they could differ on is the step size when they innovate. And our assumption here is that quality innovation builds on previous quality levels, which means that quality innovation carries spillovers. Whereas for process efficiency, because these things are harder to imitate and firms could potentially protect them like trade secrets, those could have less spillovers than quality. And in this framework, we compare what the decentralized equilibrium would look like compared to what a planner would do in terms of application. And from this, we quantify the source of R&D misallocation in this framework and try to see whether it's a potentially large source of misallocation. To give you a quick summary of what we find. So we find theoretically in our framework that when we compare the decentralized equilibrium to what the planner would like to allocate, we have like 5 different margins of differences that could happen between the planner and the decentralized equilibrium. But on net, when we think about all the margins, what we find is that the planner would like to reallocate R&D resources towards firms that have big quality step sizes, precisely to take advantage of the spillovers. And so that's a theoretical finding in our paper. We also take the model to the data. We will use French data, French manufacturing data, where we try to infer differences in firm sizes coming from process efficiency differences versus quality step size differences. And when we fit our model to the French data, what we find is that the decentralized equilibrium has about 0.5 percentage point per year lower growth compared to what the planner could achieve. And this is coming from not the differences in total amount of R&D, but purely how we allocate R&D across firms. So the takeaway that we have from this paper is that even if we don't think about R&D allocation in total, just reallocating R&D across firms could be a potential gain for policy in terms of raising. Okay. So there's quite a lot of papers featuring R&D misallocation due to constrained for time. I won't go into a lot of details. What we are excited about is that in the recent in the past few years, as you can see, there are a lot of exciting new work that's really kind of narrowing and focusing on R&D misallocation across firms, not necessarily or across industries, across firms. So, for example, Huiyu Li and Misallocation, their current working papers are thinking about how R&D resources is allocated across industries. So we hear from them by thinking about within industry across firms. But I just want to highlight that there is a new kind of interest within the endogenous growth literature to really think about R&D. All right. So first, I'd like to show you some motivating evidence that we've documented for the French data. A lot of these evidence actually guides us when we make our modeling choices. So let me go into that first. So our data set comes from French manufacturing. This is supposed to be a representative sample of firms in France, in French manufacturing. Our data set covers 2012, 2019, and it's a combination of different data sets. The first data set is the financial statement of all firms in France, but we focus mostly on manufacturing. And in this data set, we have value added, wage bill, we have inputs. This allows us to measure firm productivity. And then we also have a separate measurement for firm inputs. This comes from this worker and firm match data set. And the good thing about this is that by having a separate measure of inputs that's coming from different data set, that allows us to address a lot of potential measurement errors. And then the other good thing about French data is that we have product level prices and quantities for firms. So for this, we can measure price indices at the firm level. And then we also have some data on firm R&D expenditure. So after all the cleaning and combining all the data sets, what we have is about 130,000 firm year observations for a little bit over 30,000 firms. So these are all manufactured. So the key variables we construct from this data set, the first is what we call revenue productivity, so TFPR. So TFPR is constructed for each firm and each period by dividing value added for that firm by this composite of capital and labor input. The K is the capital input and W is the wage. And then from this, we construct physical productivity, which we define as the revenue productivity divided by the firm level price. And this firm level price we construct from the product level data. What we have is we take the products for a firm and then we sell weighted by its share for that firm. And that gives us price index. Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you mentioned it's not quality adjusted. Is that something you're going to address later? Because it seems like that might be pretty important.
Yeah, so actually, precisely, we don't quality adjust the price. And the reason is that when we actually take it to the data to take it to the model to interpret that, we'll interpret that quality could be driving the price differences across firms, in addition to the market cost. Okay. So from this, what we look at is like how does firm size correlate with firm price and firm revenue productivity? So first thing we found is it's quite robust within the French data that the larger firms tend to actually have higher prices. So on the x-axis, we have total hours, labor input in logs. And on the y-axis, we have the unit price of the firm in logs. And what we find is that firms that put in more, have a larger labor input, they also have higher prices. And one thing that we make sure is that to address potential measurement error, the hours that we use to measure labor input, this comes from a separate data set from things that we use to measure TFPQ and prices. Okay. So larger firms have higher prices. And then the other thing that was a little bit surprising for us was that we don't find a strong relationship between TFPQ and prices and firm size. Usually we might think that larger firms are large because they have high prices. They're able to produce the same quantity with fewer inputs, and that's why look at productive in that way, that's why it's big. But what we actually find is that, there's very little relationship. This relationship is not significant, and I'll show you on the robustness check later, sometimes we can find a negative relationship. And so if you're using French data, larger firms don't have higher TFPQ. And here, actually, the good thing about French data is by having a separate measurable. We rule out any like negative relationship that would be purely by measure.
So the x-axis there is the hours of work at that firm in the year, is that what it is, or what is the x-axis?
So the x-axis, we take that from the worker from match data. So in the worker from match data, it reports how many employees they have in the contract. And then from that, we have the hours that's in their contract, and we sum across the workers. And then we.
The total hours worked at that firm.
Yeah.
And the scale looks a little bit odd. I don't know if it's an easy way to explain. Negative log.
Oh, if we take out center year fixed effects, so these are residual lives. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of these facts that I just showed you, they're actually quite robust in this data set. So we checked for robustness for example, for price and hours relationship. Here, in the first column is the baseline. This is positive relationship between firm price and firm labor input. And then we also added control for the firm age. We added different levels of aggregation for firm by industry, as well as like different ways of measuring measuring hours. And we keep on finding this positive relationship between firm price and also firm size. Similarly, for the relationship between firm TFPQ and firm size, we find across all the robustness checks that we did, that larger firms just don't appear to have larger TFPQ. So the robust check we did include things like adding the age control, and we also tried different ways of measuring TFPQ. And then one concern you may have is that maybe some of this relationship between hours and TFPQ is driven by like heterogeneous capital labor ratios across firms, that they might have different capital labor intensity. So we also try to address that. And then of course, measuring capital is difficult. So in the baseline I showed you, we used only physical capital. We have in the financial statement an imperfect measure of intangible. We also try including that to see if that makes a difference. So overall, we just don't find a lot of relationship between firm TFPQ and firm size. So in addition to the relationship between size, price, and TFPQ, we also looked at just how much does TFPQ grow at a firm. Do firm in general get better and better over time in terms of how good they are at producing units? And what we find is actually for the French manufacturing, TFPQ growth is very low. So first, if we take average TFPQ growth across all the firms in our data set, that's only about 0.1% per year. And this is quite small relative to aggregate TFP growth for French manufacturing over this period. So over this period is 2.3%, whereas in our data, TFPQ is 0.1%. So that suggests to us probably a lot of TFP growth that's being captured for the French data is not coming from improvements in process efficiency per se. It's probably coming from quality.
It's like a match sample. So this is the 0.1% is the improvement of the same firm from year to year. Is that what that is?
So based on our model, we can aggregate growth across. So it's a match sample, so we can calculate the growth of the same firm. And then by doing a proper weighting of the growth, we can come up with a model consistent measure of aggregate.
Right, but is the 0.1%, is that meant to be for the same firm, or is that across? There's entry and exit of firms. So I guess some of the
I see. Yeah. So this is
firms and some of it the same firm over time.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So the one that we are capturing right now is only for incumbent firms, because in order to capture the TFP growth, it's coming from incumbent firms. Yeah. Right.
Whereas the 2.3% includes entry and exit, right?
So this is measure growth. And so in our previous work, we actually argued that a lot of that is not captured in the growth because of the way we measure price indices. So for the 2.3, we think probably it's coming from income. The ones that we can capture are probably coming from incomes.
I think both of them.
Yeah, that's the way.
I understand. Okay.
That's how we interpret that, because I think it's really hard to measure the growth contribution of entrants. In the way things are measured right
I
now.
mean, just in the United States data, is there evidence that like less productive firms are more likely to fail out of business?
I'm not saying that, I'm not talking about whether it's actually really contributing growth or not, but here we're saying that 2.3% is a measure of growth. And we're thinking that the way the measurement is done, they might be missing out on actual contribution. That's from our previous work. Yeah. So in addition for the TPQ growth being low on average for these firms, we also find it to be very persistent. So this is a heat map that shows the rank of TPQ for firm in T-5, and then their ranking in the next year, in 5 years. And the dark blue means that there's very few firms, and the green and yellow are the ones where you have most firms. And what we find is that there's a lot of mass on the diagonals, which means that a firm that's ranking, say, top in TPQ 5 periods earlier are more very likely to be also the highest rank in 5 years ago. So TPQ is very persistent at the firm level, but it doesn't really contribute a lot to growth. And this will actually motivate our modeling choice later that will make TPQ a permanent ex-ante attribute of the firm. So it doesn't change and it stays with the firm. So another part of our analysis in the model is that we make the assumption that process efficiency doesn't carry a lot of spillovers. The spillovers are coming from quality innovation and product innovation. So here we're drawing on this very long, like a literature from innovation that looks at how firms protect their productive advantages. And it seems like in that literature, the consensus is that for process efficiency, firms tend to use trade secrets in order to protect that. Whereas for product innovation, usually firms are more likely to use patenting to protect those advantages. But with patents, we think that because with patents being released, the knowledge of how to make those product innovations gets spread out into the economy, and so that will carry more spill. And indeed, when we look at the French data in terms of patenting, so what we did was to link French patent data to the firms in our data set. And then we looked at for firms that have, then we have a firm survey about what they do with their innovation. When they have innovation, do they actually patent those things? And what we find is that for firms that report having only a process innovation versus the firm that reports having only a product innovation, firms that are doing product innovation are 3 times more likely to patent than firms that only do process innovation. So we take this as suggestive evidence for supporting our assumption that firms that have quality innovation are the ones that have spillovers, whereas firms that have process innovation will assume in the model that they don't have spillovers to other firms in the model. Okay. Yes, so that was the motivating evidence. So now we build a model to match these evidence that we established in the French data. So this is a general equilibrium model with intelligence growth. First, let me just talk about the household. This is the worrying side. So I'll get that out of the way. So we have a representative household with long preferences. And here the final output that the household consumes as produced is a Cobb-Douglas aggregator of each goods. So Q is the quality of each good, each variety, and Y is the quantity. So the intermediate good producers, we assume there's J number of intermediate goods producers. So in this paper, we won't be thinking about entry and exit of producers. We're focusing only on incumbent firms. And then each firm has a knowledge to produce a particular variety I at a quality. And then here we assume that the firms differ primarily in 2 dimensions. First is their process efficiency. So some firms just happen to have high process efficiency. And this is motivated by the evidence I showed you earlier that firm TFPQ is very persistent and it doesn't really change. Aggregate TFPQ doesn't really contribute a lot to growth. So here, that's why we're fixing process efficiency to be a permanent attribute for a firm. And then firms have also permanent different step sizes in quality improvement. So these are the two dimensions that they differ. So the way process efficiency into the production function is that when a firm produces a particular variety, say Y units of that, the firm needs to use this HA times L units of labor. So higher process efficiency means that for the same amount of labor input, the firm can produce higher units of output. And here for simplicity, we assume that there are two types of firms. One have higher process efficiency, another one has low process efficiency. So process efficiency doesn't generate growth in the model. So growth in the model is all coming from quality innovation. So here, a firm can spend a certain number of units of research labor in order to randomly draw a line randomly draw a line and improve that line. And the improvement it can make is this step size that's a firm actually. And here we assume that it's two different step sizes, like big and small. So overall, in this simple model, we have 4 different types of firms. We have firms that are good at both. They have high process efficiency and big step sizes. And then we have firms that are bad at all of them. They have low process efficiency and small step sizes. And then we have the in-between. So the share of firm of each type will be exogenous in our model, but the key endogenous object in our model will be this SK, which is the share of lines produced by each firm type. And this will have implications for productivity, level, and growth in our model. And these shares will be endogenously determined. So we have firms of different abilities. So the reason all of these firms coexist in our economy is because of this overhead cost. So we assume that there is a convex overhead cost, that when the firm operates in more lines, the marginal cost of adding a line is increased for these firms. And this convex overhead cost gives us a well-defined boundary for the firm. So in terms of resource constraints, so the final output that's being produced can be used for the consumption of households and the overhead costs. And then I just want to emphasize that here we're fixing the total amount of R&D labor, and we're fixing the total amount of production labor. And the reason we're doing this is to really focus on allocation of R&D across firms and allocation of production labor across firms. So here, any distortion and cost of distortion that I show you later is coming from purely from allocation. It's not from the total amount of R&D or production labor. So here we will be comparing the balanced growth path of the decentralized equilibrium with the planetary solution. So in this simple model, the growth rate of the economy will be this weighted average of the step sizes of the firms. And the weights are the exogenous sales shares of each type of firm. So if the high step size firms have a lot of sales share in the economy, that will raise the long run growth in this economy. So that's the environment. Let me show you how we define the decentralized equilibrium. So here to define the decentralized equilibrium, we have to first take a stand on what we think about as a competition structure. So here we'll assume that there's Bertrand competition within each product line. So in that competition structure, what the leading firm in each line does is that it sets its price, its quality adjusted price, to be equal to the quality adjusted marginal cost of the second best producer. So that's the first equation. The left-hand side is the quality adjusted price of the best producer, JI, and the right-hand side is the quality adjusted marginal cost of the second best producer. And what this then implies is that the marginal cost on that line will be the price, the marginal cost of the second best producer divided by the marginal cost of the first best producer. So the markup in a line will depend on two things. First is the process efficiency advantage of the best producer versus the second best producer. And then the second thing is the quality step size of the best producer. So in this economy, firms that have higher process efficiency will tend to, on average, have higher markup across its lines. And then also firms that have higher quality step sizes will on average have higher markups.
Are there
Across
two
lines.
producers per line? What has it third best?
We only have one producer per line. So in because the best producer prices at the margin cost of the second best producer, it basically prices out all the other.
So the second best producer doesn't produce.
Doesn't produce, yeah. All right. So that's that was a markup in a line for a firm. So a firm can operate in many lines because the firms are randomly drawing lines. And when the firm draws lines, because this is random, they can't target the lines with highest markup. So for each firm, they could face potentially two different types of markups, depending on whether the second best producer is a high process efficiency producer or low process. So when we sum across the lines, this is the what I'm showing you here is the profit for a firm in a period. So the first line is the profit that it gets in the lines where they're facing this high process efficiency. And then the middle term is when they face low. And then we subtract the overhead cost. But what this says is that firms that because things are drawn randomly, firms that have high process efficiency themselves, or they have high step sizes, they tend to have higher profits for the same number of lines. Okay. And then so that was the static profit. So the firm also have to make a dynamic decision in terms of how much R&D to do. So a firm each period will lose a certain number of products due to creative destruction, but then the firm can also invest in R&D in order to replenish for the lines that they lose. And this is the dynamic problem of the firm. So the firm chooses the R&D input to maximize the present discount value of its profits. Okay. So on the balanced growth path, the number of lines produced by a firm is closely tied to this first order condition. This is the first order condition for the firm when they choose R&D. And I'm taking the difference between two types of firms. So the left-hand side gives you the size difference of two types of firms, K and K prime. And then that difference has to equal to what we see on the right-hand side. And what the right-hand side is determined by the differences in the markup across its products. So if firm type K has higher markups, and that's coming from higher process efficiency or higher step sizes, that firm type K will be larger than firm K prime. So in our economy, the share of lines that's produced by the firms are determined by the managers of the firm. So firms that have higher markups are also larger in terms of products, in terms of sales, and in terms of labor inputs. Okay. But one thing that I would like you to take away from this is that the process efficiency term and the step size term, they all inter together. So it doesn't matter whether your markup is coming from higher process efficiency or higher step sizes. What the firm cares is about at the end is how much profit it can generate. The firm doesn't really internalize that the process efficiency doesn't have spillovers compared to quality inflation. So the firm doesn't care, but the planner does. So in terms of the planner solution, so here our planner is maximizing the utility of the household subject to the same resource constraints as the firms. And then, so first the planner will do differently is that firms will equalize production labor across all the lines. So in our decentralized equilibrium, because of heterogeneous markups across lines, different lines have different amounts of labor. That means that high markup firms, they're producing too little. So the first thing planner will do will be to fix that. But then on the dynamic sense, when we think about how much R&D input the planner puts into different types of firms, what I show you here in the equation is the planner's first order condition. And this differs from the firm's first order condition precisely because the planner puts a higher weight on the step size differences compared to the firm. So in the firm, A and gamma will intermultiplicatively, but here we have this extra term in red that's in front of the step size. So for example, if the household is more patient, the planner cares more about growth, and that'll be a bigger weight on the step size. So just looking at this first order conditions, we can already see that the planner would choose to do something different to the decentralized equilibrium. So when we compare the planner solution to the decentralized equilibrium, we will compare the welfare along the balanced growth path. And that welfare depends on both the level of consumption as well as growth rate of consumption. So the level depends on, for different margins. It depends on the overhead cost share that's being used in the economy. It depends on average quality, average process efficiency, and markup dispersion. And then the growth rate will depend on the share of sales that's being done by the small versus big. So let me just take us through a special case to really, I think this really illustrates the idea in the model. So in this model, we can construct a special case where there's no markup heterogeneity across firms at all. So suppose you have two types of firm. One type has low process efficiency, big step size, and another type has high process efficiency, small step size. And we can assume that the advantages for the firm are the same. So in this constructed example, there's no heterogeneity in markups across firms. So all of the firm will be the same size. So if we think about any size-based policies for reallocation, you can't really do it because everyone's the same size. But in this economy, the planner will actually want to do something different because the planner cares about the step size difference more than the process efficiency difference. So as a result of that, so first the planner will make the big step size firms bigger, and this would then generate faster growth rate in the planner solution. But because the planner is allocating towards the high step size firms, it's giving up some process efficiency. So the level of consumption, in first period will be lower for the planner because they have lower average process efficiency. And then in addition, because the planner is now creating size differences across firms, and with the convex overhead cost, the planner will now have higher overhead cost because it's creating size differences from no size differences. So then the consumption share of output is lower in the planners. And the planner gets higher allocated efficiency by getting rid of markup across lines. So in this case, the planner is gaining by making growth rate higher, but it's also creating, it's making some losses on the other dimension. So at the end, what is the net benefit will be netting out all of these dimensions. Okay. All right. So the next part I would like to talk about is when we take it to the data, just to get some idea of how potentially how big this R&D misallocation. So when we take to the French data, we're calibrating the parameters in the model. And in addition to the model I showed you, because France also have R&D subsidies, we actually extend the model to include the R&D subsidies when we calibrate the French data. Okay. So just to give some intuition on how we use the data to discipline the model. So in our model, the TFPR that we measure in the data, if we use a model to interpret those data objects that we construct, that's going to be a combination of the step size and process efficiency. The prices, which include quality, that will be proportional to the step size difference of the firms, and the TFPQ that we measure in data maps to the process efficiency of firms. And so by looking through the lens of the model, we can use the interpret the data on how size and price are related and how size and TFPQ are related to get some sense of how size are related to the step size versus process efficiency. So in the model, we'll end up inferring that we have a lot of firms in the model that have that are in the middle, that have high step size and low TFPQ, and low step size and high TFPQ. And the reason we're getting this is that in the data, we saw that price is correlated with size, but TFPQ is not correlated. So in our model, all else equal, high TFPQ firms should be larger. But to get this non-correlation between TFPQ and size, what we need is the high TFPQ firms have low step sizes. And that cancels out the positive benefits for having high TFPQ. So we need to have a lot of firms that kind of these two different types. And then in addition, we do get a relationship, positive relationship, price and size. And for the model to rationalize that, we need the step size gap to be bigger than the process efficiency gap. so that even if you're a firm that have low TFPQ, if you have high step sizes, you're able to be bigger, to become bigger. So that's kind of the gist of how we use the data I showed you at the beginning to discipline the different types of model. Okay. So this is the calibration we get. We target 12 moments for the 12 parameters in the model. So we try to match dispersion in prices, in TFPQ, and also in size. And then we also try to match the elasticities I showed you in the beginning. And then we try to match aggregate price cost, markup ratio, the growth rate, interest rate, and R&D share of output. So we do relatively well for most of the moments. We're getting the signs roughly right for the microelasticities, but we're not getting them completely like on point yet. So that's something we're working on. Okay. Let me go to the results. So based on the calibration, under those parameters, we can calculate what's the distribution of sales, decentralized equilibrium, and then we can solve for the plan solution. So the first line in the table is the sales share of firms of different types. So for example, firms that have high process efficiency have about 37% of the sales, and the firms that have big step size have 73%. So the second line is what the planner would do. And what the planner would do is actually, in this case, we ended up going to a corner solution that the planner actually wants to shut down all of the firms that have low step size. And what that means is that the planner will allocate some production to the high step size, high process efficiency, big step size firms, and will also allocate towards firms that have low step size, big step size, and low process efficiency. But because the firms that already have high process efficiency, big step size, they're already big. If the planner makes them too bigger, the overhead cost increases faster. So most of the allocation that the planner does is actually allocating towards the middle firms. It's making the firms that have low process efficiency and big step size. And then by allocating towards these firms, the planner is able to generate higher growth. So here's what this allocation does. So in terms of the growth effect, planner can generate about 50 basis point higher growth rate. So the decentralized equilibrium is 2.3%. The planner gets to 2.8%. And in permanent consumption equivalent term, this is 19%. Okay. But then on the levels, the planner is giving up on the consumption share of output, because now it's making some firms bigger. The overhead cost share of output increases. And then the process efficiency on average declines, because now some of the firms that have high process efficiency but small step sizes, they're being shut down. And then finally, the planner is making some improvements on allocated efficiency, but that's a relatively small margin. So on net, combining all the growth and level effects, what we find is that we could have a permanent consumption gain of 11%. So there could be potentially large gains from just allocating R&D differently across firms.
So if I'm thinking about the firm sizes, basically this looks like reallocating resources from small firms to medium-sized firms.
Oh yeah, sure. So the question was, how does this allocation happen? Are we just looking at, if we just look at firm size, are we reallocating towards the medium-sized firms?
Is that like what's happening?
Yes, it is. So in this sense, the largest firms also get some, but the firms that like in the middle, I would say on the upper side of the middle, are the ones that are getting most resources.
So then if you map this onto like a more real-world policy, so the policymaker can't actually see the trend that's here, but France has like the size-based R&D. So a real-life version of this would just be increasing the size-based R&D.
Yeah. So actually, yes. Also, the follow-up question was how we think about real-world policies that map to this. So when we calibrated the model, we included the R&D subsidy program in France. And what the subsidy does is that it has a cutoff. Up to that cutoff for revenue, firms get about 33%, 30% subsidy rate for R&D. But once you get above that cutoff, it's only 5%. So it's actually penalizing the larger or medium larger firms. So I think a policy that's only targeting size, in our case, it will actually be better to give more subsidy to the larger firms. Yeah, you want the marginal R&D rate to be increasing in size rather than declining in size. Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. So,
Questions online too.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you finish up and then we'll take some questions.
okay, sure. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so, okay. So, to conclude, so in this paper, we study R&D allocation across firms and think about whether R&D could be misallocated to a point that is actually damaging for growth in a quantitative way. And we calibrate our model to French data. And what we find is that there's actually quite potentially a lot of room for improving growth and welfare by allocating R&D across firms. So the next steps we're working on right now, one is to incorporate US data. We have access to census data and we're trying to do similar analysis. Okay? And then, related to the question, we're thinking about optimal size dependent R&D subsidies. And then, so here, among the authors, we're also trying to figure out what are concrete examples of firms that we can actually think about. We discussed this with other people. So here we try to bin some firms into high step size, high process efficiency. But I mean, it's something we're still trying to clarify in our minds. Any feedback from you about what type of firms, what firms out there can we say are high step size with high process efficiency? I think that would be really helpful for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So, we don't have time for questions. Go online. So we have a question from Orson Mangara. Two questions really, but what motivated the choice of key indicators in the study? And then the second one, which I think you sort of answered a little bit, but you can say more. What advice would you give for designing a policy framework that favors good rents and discourages bad ones to maximize economic growth?
So I guess by key indicators, you mean like the firm revenue productivity and TFPQ?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So one is that I think when we think about firm size differences, firm process efficiency and firm revenue productivity, these are key objects that we study in the literature. So they're natural things for us to think about. But then also because we're thinking about like process efficiency and quality step size differences in spillovers across those. Those are the things that like TFPQ and also the TFPR measures we have, the data and prices are the data objects that in our framework like map to those.
Great. So I have a question. So in terms of understanding the spillovers, I mean, this is spillovers to consumers.
We're thinking about spillovers to other firms. So for example, we think about Amazon or Walmart. They could be really good at their distribution system in terms of logistics, but if we could another firm become next to Amazon, next Walmart, but looking at how they're selling, it's really hard to copy. But if we think about, say in biotech, or we're just discussing today with the Nobel Prize winning, that you have patents about how to make the new technology to new vaccine. With those patents, other firms can learn from that and perhaps build on that. So those are the ones we think have higher spillovers. So it's about how much other firms can learn from your information.
Okay. And so you have these exogenous step sizes, and as you move things around, those step sizes just stay the same in the firms that have it. How would the model change if, when you did this reallocation, it affected the incentives to create those step sizes?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting question. That right now we don't have incumbents on innovation, which would be them trying to figure out how much they can improve on their own products, and maybe at that point they have control of their step sizes. So here, I think if firms are able to actually decide the step size they do, and they know that having high step size carries larger R&D subsidies, maybe that will incentivize them to make more high quality innovation.
Or not just the subsidies. I mean, imagine if there's competition that would affect how hard you try to make process improvements, or how hard you try to make step sizes. And if, like in one case, you shut down a whole set of competitors, which were inefficient, but maybe they're doing something to spur innovation in the other guys because they don't want to be taken over.
Yeah, so actually so I think there are two margins in our previous work when we're thinking about how changing the set of the competition structure could affect firms. So we actually found that there are two dimensions. One is that when the firm sees other firms being blocked out because of, say, technology changes, that could incentivize them to produce more. But then if the firms that to innovate more, But if the firms that are left over are all really good firms and then competition gets more intense, that they're more likely to go head on head with another firm that's also really good, that might reduce their incentive. So in our previous work, we find that it's it could happen in both ways. It's going to be it's going to be mixing quant.
Right. Well, Philippe and others had this sort of U-shape to
Yeah,
it, so like you go
exactly.
either or inverted U.
Yeah, inverted U, yeah. I think both sorts of
Other questions? Go ahead, David. I'll read this.
Thanks. I see a bunch of non-manufacturing firms on this list here. Would you be able to make any assumptions or like changes to the model, or what kind of data would you need, or do you think you could directly translate your insights into non-manufacturing firms?
I think for non-manufacturing, there's certain things that are not in our model that could be potentially important. One thing I think about is platforms. For example, here we were thinking about, okay, should Meta or Twitter, are they high step size, high process? I guess the point I was trying to make from this paper is that we want to think about not just about size differences as a way of thinking about how we allocate things, but the spillover differences. So in abstract sense, I think our model is talking about spillovers, but I think to actually really analyze these and quantify things outside of manufacturing, we should think about other forms of advantages to firms. So for example, when like I put Twitter and Meta here in the high process efficiency, I was thinking that more abstractly that they're big and a lot of users are on their platform, but maybe it's more about them being just the lucky one that have a lot of users, and that's their advantage. I don't see another firm here to replicate that, because in order to replicate that, they have to go with users. So it's not something that could have high spillovers. But I think that's outside of our model in terms of the platform.
Well, just looking at this list, so you sort of have kind of stereotyped them into those two categories. There's at least two other categories, which is like, what if you're doing both, or what if you're doing neither? I mean, is the sense that you're always investing in, or could there be some that like just decide not to do much R&D, or is there any? I don't know if this is outside your model, but whether there are complementarities between having high step size, high process efficiency, or not.
Yeah, so here actually in our model, we do have the firms in the middle with both high step size. They could have both high step size, high process efficiency, or high step size low. So we do allow for mixtures. But what the planner in the model will do is to really make the high step size firms bigger, because that's where the externality is. It doesn't matter whether it's high step size paired with low process efficiency or high step size paired with high process efficiency. As long as you have high step size, and the firm is not internalizing their spillovers, they should be made bigger according to the planner. So that's one thing. And then I think actually in terms of complementarity, that's actually a really interesting question. I think because in our model right now, we're kind of tying the firms together. Like it could be that a firm that have high step size, maybe they innovate and allow another firm that have high process efficiency to produce. So I think there is that natural complementarity for the firms, but right now we're not allowing for that in the model. In a potential follow-up project, we're actually thinking about mergers acquisitions. Maybe there's also room for gain if firms could have to do R&D, but then the other firms are the ones that are producing.
Okay, any last question? Okay, well, thank you very much, Huiyu. That was terrific.
Thank you very much.
And next week, we have Simon Johnson coming in from MIT, talking about power and progress. So see you next Monday. See you next Monday.